Good morning. Glad you could join me. I think video is getting going here. Okay, now we're on for sure. Thanks for joining me. I'm back in Canby after the little trip down to Salem to Western Mennonite Church. And we're back in 2 Samuel after a little diversion into Psalms. And we're up to 2 Samuel 19. Excuse me. So this is a long chapter, and so I'll just try to tell the story rather than reading the whole thing. As a reminder, previously David had fled from Jerusalem when his son Absalom had led a conspiracy to overthrow David's rule and make himself king. Absalom had an opportunity to chase down David and destroy him, but he listened to bad advice rather than good advice. And David was able to get away with his people and regroup and regather his strength. And even though David is suffering the consequences for his sin of adultery with Bathsheba and then murdering her husband Uriah, God is still looking out for him because David had prayed when he was fleeing, that God would make the advice of Ahithophel, the renowned advisor, seem foolish. And that's what God did. And David also had help from the priests and other allies. So he had a lot of help. Well, after David regroups and gathers his strength, Absalom and his army comes to where David is, and there's a battle. But David has superior fighters. They're more experienced, and they defeat Absalom's men. And ironically, Absalom gets his hair stuck in the branches of a tree, and when his mule keeps on walking, he gets left hanging there by his hair. And that's ironic because Absalom really loves his hair. Even though David had commanded everyone to treat Absalom well, Joab, David's top commander, kills Absalom and buries him in a pit and covers up his body with a large pile of rocks. Well, David, who's back waiting in the city, he didn't go out to the battle. He finds out from messengers that Absalom is dead, and he's grief-stricken. And he says, my son Absalom, if only I had died instead of you. Absalom, my son, my son. And that's where we start today. So David is mourning, and Joab is informed that David's mourning for Absalom. And so instead of the people celebrating the victory that they had won that day, it's a day of mourning. People sneak back into town, and it says, just as people who are humiliated surreptitiously flee in battle. And so where they should have been celebrating, they are all in mourning because David is in mourning. Well, David continues on, and he says, my son Absalom, Absalom, my son, my son. And Joab, he's not pleased by this at all. And he comes to the king and he says, today you have shamed all of your servants. You who have saved your life today, and the lives of your sons and your daughters, the lives of your wives, the lives of your concubines, by loving those who hate you and by hating those who love you. For you have revealed today that commanders and servants are nothing to you. For I know that if Absalom were alive and all of us were dead today, then it would be right as far as you are concerned. Now, therefore, arise, go out and speak kindly to your servants, for I swear by the Lord, if you do not go out, no man will stay the night with you, and this will be worse for you than all the misfortune that has happened to you from your youth until now. So that's pretty severe. But David gets himself up and sits by the gate and the people come before the king. Meantime, the people of Israel, who had been with Absalom in the rebellion, they get to talking and they say, well, David saved us from our enemies and then fled from Absalom. But now Absalom, whom we made king, has been killed. Why are we not bringing the king back? David, he's also figuring out how he can be restored as king. And so he sends the priests to the elders of Judah to ask them, well, why are you the last to bring the king back to his house? All Israel has come to the king. You are my brothers. Why then are you the last to bring me back? And also tell Amasa that I will make him commander of the army in place of Joab. Well, that convinces the men of Judah, and they send word to David that he should return. So he starts back to Jerusalem, and he's on the east side of the Jordan River. And so he comes to the Jordan River, and the men of Judah come to Gilgal, and they plan to go meet David and help him across the river. And then when David gets there, he runs into three people, Shimei, Mephibosheth, and Barzillai. And the encounter with Shimei is in verses 16 to 23. And since he's a Benjamite, he's related to King Saul, David's predecessor. And he has 1,000 men with him, and Saul's servant Ziba, along with Ziba's 15 sons and 20 servants. And they start going back and forth across the river, helping David's household across the river. Now Shimei, he appeared back in chapter 16 when David is fleeing, and he cursed David. And at the time, David let it go, even though his nephew Abishai wanted to kill Shimei right then and there. Well, now Shimei asks David not to hold that incident against him, but Abishai is there again too, and he says Shimei should be put to death for cursing the king. And David says to Abishai, what is that between you and me, you sons of Zeruiah, that you should be an adversary to me today? Should anyone be put to death in Israel today? For I do not know that I am king, for do I not know that I am king over Israel today? So the king said to Shimei, you shall not die. The king also swore to him. Just as a side note, it's interesting, the word for adversary there is Satan, in Hebrew. Satan is a Hebrew word that means adversary. So David lets Shimei off the hook for now, and Shimei will be back when Solomon is king. Well, in verses 24 to 30, David runs into Mephibosheth, and back in chapter 9, David had wanted to show loving kindness to someone from Saul's family for the sake of Saul and Jonathan. And he was told about Jonathan's son and therefore Saul's grandson, Mephibosheth, who became crippled when his nurse fled after hearing of Saul and Jonathan's death. So he gave Mephibosheth, all of Saul's lands and made Ziba his servant. And he also had Mephibosheth live in Jerusalem and eat at his own table, David's own table, like he was a son. So that was very nice for Mephibosheth. Well, when David fled Jerusalem, Mephibosheth's servant Ziba met David with donkeys loaded down with supplies. And David asked Ziba, well, where's Mephibosheth? And Ziba told David that Mephibosheth had said, today the house of Israel will restore the kingdom of my father to me. And so Ziba told David that Mephibosheth was intended to be king. So David, at that time, David gave all of Saul's lands to Ziba. Well, now Mephibosheth comes to meet the king, and it says there that he had neither tended his feet nor trimmed his mustache, nor washed his clothes since the day the king departed until the day he came home in peace. And when David asks him why he didn't go with him when he fled Jerusalem, Mephibosheth says that Ziba betrayed him and has been going around slandering him. But he says David should do what is good in his own sight, because all of my father's household was only people worthy of death to my lord the king. And yet you placed me, your servant, among those who ate at your own table. So what right do I still have that I should complain any more to the king? Well, David answers kind of harshly. He says, well, why do you still speak to me of your affairs? I have decided you and Ziba shall divide the land. And Mephibosheth says to him, well, let him take even all of it, since my lord the king has come safely to his own house. And it's a little hard to discern which one of the two, Ziba or Mephibosheth, David believes, which one is telling the truth. One commentator thinks that David believes Mephibosheth, but he's grateful to Ziba for the help that Ziba has provided. And so therefore he divides the lands between them. And then the third person David meets is Barzillai. At the end of chapter 17, Barzillai is one of the people who brings David supplies to help him and his people regain their strength to fight Absalom. And so David owes Barzillai a huge debt. David wants him to cross over the Jordan with him and go to Jerusalem. But Barzillai says, well, look, I'm 80 years old. How long will I live if I go to Jerusalem? Also, since I'm so old, I can't taste food and wine anymore. I can't hear singing, and I will just be a burden. And so let me go home and I will die there. But here's my son, Kimham. And so you do for him what is good in your sight. And David says, well, okay, Kimham will cross over with me and I will do for him what is good in your sight. Whatever you require of me, that is what I will do for you. And so verse 39 says, all the people crossed over the Jordan and the king crossed too. The king then kissed Barzillai and blessed him, and he, Barzillai, returned to his own place. Well, after David deals with these people, there's a little feud between the people of Israel and the people of Judah. David goes to Gilgal, accompanied by all the people of Judah and half the people of Israel. And then the other men from Judah come to David and ask him why the men of Judah had abducted him and brought him and his household across the Jordan. And the men of Judah respond, well, he's our close relative. Why are you angry? We haven't eaten at the king's expense or taken anything for ourselves. And the men of Israel say, well, we have 10 parts in the king, and therefore we have more claim on the king than you. And that's because Israel consisted of the 10 northern tribes, and Judah was the tribe of Judah, and also Benjamin was usually incorporated with Judah. And this is a little foreshadow of the division that will come at the end of Solomon's reign. The men of Israel also said, hey, it was our advice first to bring the king back. So in other words, it was our idea. And it ends, the last verse says, yet the words of the men of Judah were harsher than the words of the men of Israel. And so we don't get a resolution of this conflict in this chapter. So that's the story. Excuse me. Well, someone once pointed me to a short document called The Common Denominator of Success by Albert Gray. I think it was a teacher at seminary. Well, Gray was a life insurance salesman, and he was trying to teach other people and mentor them in selling life insurance. And he was wondering why some people who sell life insurance succeed while others fail. And so he decided to look into it, and he read a lot of biographies and whatnot. And he concluded that the common denominator of success is forming the habit of doing things that people don't like to do. And the things that people don't like to do generally are the things that nobody likes to do, because they're kind of unnatural, and we tend to follow our natural likes and avoid our natural dislikes. And we're guided by our natural preferences and prejudices. Well, in his case, in life insurance, what people don't like to do is to call on other people out of the blue who don't want to see them, and then talk to these people about something they don't want to talk about, life insurance. And because they don't like it, life insurance salespeople don't do what they need to do. They don't follow a prospecting program to find people to talk to. And then once they convince somebody to talk to them, they don't give a prescribed sales talk or organize their time and effort toward this goal of selling life insurance. And of course, this not only applicable to selling life insurance, but other types of businesses and occupations. It's also true in relationships, family and friends and church family and so on. It's true in our finances. If we want to be successful financially, we're going to have to do things that most people don't want to do. Not spend money, save money, work hard and make enough money to live on, live below our means. And of course, it's true in our spiritual life too. There are things that people don't want to do that are sort of critical for our success in our spiritual lives. Things like reading the Bible, going to church, praying, serving others, giving our money, and so on. Giving up sins that hold us back, giving up things that are good, but they're holding us back. And so people who are successful spiritually, they've made a habit of doing some things that they don't naturally want to do. And of course, we have an adversary who wants to keep us from doing those things. And God will help us out by giving us the desire to do those things if we ask. And life insurance is, selling life insurance is also a little bit like evangelism. We have this wonderful story to tell people, but we don't want to make contact with people, the contact that's necessary to share the gospel with them. And even when we do make the contact, they don't want to hear about it from us sometimes, not initially. And so we're reluctant to be bold in sharing the gospel. But the gospel is, kind of like life insurance for eternity. So we do need to cultivate the habit of doing things that we may not naturally want to do in order to be successful in life and successful spiritually. And so here, David experiences a time when he doesn't want to do some things that he needed to do as king. And so he had to overcome the desire to do what he felt like doing and make himself do what he needed to do for God's people and for God's kingdom. And at the outset of the story, David is grieving because of the death of his son, Absalom. And so he doesn't want to do anything. And I've known more than a few people who have lost children, and I can't imagine the grief that would come from that loss. And so taking some time to grieve is entirely appropriate and necessary. The problem in David's situation is that he's the king, and so he's in a unique situation. And the son that he's grieving for just led a rebellion to overthrow David as king. And now David's people have just won a victory over the son and over his army. And so David, he's probably in a very unique position that most of us would not experience. And so therefore he has unique responsibilities to his people and to God. He just can't stop and do nothing. Luckily for him, I guess, he has Joab there to prod him to get up and do what he needs to do. And the commentators think that Joab exaggerated everything that was happening or was going to happen, but it works, and David gets himself down to the gate so that people could come and see him. And then David, once he gets going, he puts his mind to getting back his throne and the kingdom. Well, the Israelites have been talking, and they decide they want David back on the throne. And David must have heard about this, because he sends the priests to the elders of Judah saying, hey, Israel wants me back, but you are my family, and you haven't done anything. He says also, well, I'll appoint Amasa as commander of the army in place of Joab. Now, he probably didn't care very much for Joab after all the things he's done, but Amasa had led the armies of Absalom during the revolt. And so David is putting aside what he probably wants to do and doing what he needs to do in order to regain his kingdom. And then he ran into those few people, and he had to decide how to treat them. Shimei had cursed him when he was fleeing Jerusalem, and now here he shows up to help him. And it would have been very natural to kill the guy because David is the king and he can do that. And this is what David's nephew Abishai says. But David decides that there's been enough killing that day, and he lets it go. And the second one is Mephibosheth. I was always trained to say Mephibosheth or Mephibosheth, but then a nice man at church asked me one day, is it really Mephibosheth? And so I had to go back and look at the Hebrew, and the accent is over the bo, so Mephibosheth. So where was I? So Mephibosheth, Ziba told David that Mephibosheth was glad when David fled Jerusalem, because that meant that he would be made king because he was in the line of Saul. But Mephibosheth was lame, and so how was he going to go with David if no one would help him? And he says that Ziba's been slandering him, and he did not oppose David as king. And David seems to believe him, but he has to do something for Ziba, who's just helped him. He helped him when he was fleeing, and now he came back and helped him again. And so David decides to divide Saul's lands between Mephibosheth and Ziba. And then finally, there's Barzillai, who had helped David and his people with supplies so they could be strengthened to fight Absalom. And of course, this one is a no-brainer. But how often do people neglect to thank those who help them in a time of need? And since Barzillai just wants to go home, David promises to reward Barzillai's son instead. And then this chapter ends sort of in an unsettled fashion because the people of Israel, the 10 northern tribes, and the people of Judah, along with the Benjamin tribe, they're still in conflict. Well, what does David's story of choosing to do what he didn't feel like doing teach us? Sometimes we have to get ourselves up and fulfill our responsibilities even when we don't want to. And so there might be people who are like David, and they can't just stop everything to grieve. But most of us, we can make arrangements for things to be covered while we do what we need to do. Now, I have a big streak of laziness, and so I have to motivate myself to overcome my laziness. And I have another friend who's not lazy, but we've both learned that if you ignore something long enough, eventually they will work themselves out. The situation will work out. And there was even an article in the Wall Street Journal once about the benefits of benign neglect. Letting something work itself out is sometimes the best way to go. So it's not a crazy habit to have, but the trick is to know when to neglect benignly and when to do something. Other people, they overcommit, and so they have to prune their responsibilities if they want to do well in the ones they keep and then achieve their goals. Spiritually speaking, a lot of things we should be doing for spiritual growth are things that fallen human beings don't want to do. And plus, we have our adversary, Satan, throwing obstacles in front of us to stop us from doing them. Or we might tend to do the things we like and avoid the things we don't like. And granted, we all have spiritual gifts, and so we will want to focus in our area of giftedness, and we'll probably enjoy that, but not necessarily. But we still have to show up at church in person and get involved so we can use our gifts. And then there are things all of us can do regardless of our spiritual gifts. We can do Bible study, prayer, giving money and time, sharing the gospel as we have opportunity. Then we might need someone to prod us to do the right thing, or we might need to prod someone else to do the right thing. So like David, we might need someone to prod us into doing the right thing. I have a rule that I don't attempt to prod someone else to do something unless they've given me permission to do it. And so you all tune in voluntarily here. And so you've given me permission to prod you to do things. But we have to be careful how we go about confronting others. And we also have to give a few other people permission to hold us accountable. Well, in life, we're going to have people who treat us badly, and we might have to put those past slights behind us in order to gain our objective. David put the past behind him and made Amasa commander of his army. And that move would help unite the people behind him as king. And I don't know what you might need to put behind you in order to get on with life and achieve the goals that you're looking to achieve. We have to decide how to treat people, other people, in response to how they treated us. And so David ran into a few people on his way back to his goal, the throne in Jerusalem. Some of them had treated him poorly, and others had treated him well. And so he had to decide how to respond to them. And there's going to be people who treat us badly and others who treat us well, and we'll have to decide how to respond to them when the circumstances change. In David's future, Joab is going to kill Amasa, the man David will make commander of his armies. And then David will tell his son Solomon to punish Shimei and Joab for what they had done during David's time. And so what David does here is not necessarily a permanent solution, but what's expedient to get the kingdom reunited and reestablish himself as king. And so sometimes we have to do what's expedient in order to move toward the goal. And you can imagine in a business with employees or in a church, you might have to make peace with someone in order to keep the organization going. And it's not ideal, but sometimes you just have to do it. And later, the opportunity may arise to deal with the situation or person in a better way. And hopefully we'll have more people like Barzillai who help us when we're in dire circumstances, and then we can repay them when our circumstances change. And we have to remember to do that because it's easy to forget. Well, despite getting ourselves headed in the right direction towards some of our goals, there still may be unresolved conflict among our group of people. And you can certainly imagine how this would happen in a family or in a church, and it may happen in a workplace too. I often see conflicts bubble up when mom and dad pass away and the kids are settling the estate. It's not usually the estate itself that's the issue, but the estate gives the opportunity for people to surface old grievances, and it's not always very pleasant. And we might be able to work out these conflicts if we're willing to do things that we don't like to do. On the other hand, there are other people involved, and we can't always make other people do what they don't want to do, but we can try it. So there's a lot of things that we don't naturally want to do because we are fallen human beings. But many of those things are things that we need to do if we're going to accomplish our goals. And these goals might be selling life insurance. So it might be in business or finance related, or it might be family or relationship related, or it might be related to our spiritual lives. And if we want to accomplish our goals in these areas, we're going to have to figure out how to do the things that we naturally don't want to do. And the people who figure it out don't necessarily want to do those things, but they've figured out that sometimes they have to do the things they don't want to do if they want to be successful in some area of their lives. Now here David was grieving the death of his son Absalom and not doing what the king needed to do for his people. And he had Joab around to kind of prod him into getting up from his grief and doing what needed to be done. And so he greeted the people as they came back from their victory, and then he took the steps that were necessary to get himself reinstated as king. And along the way, he ran into people that he knew, and he had to decide how to treat them in a manner that would help him accomplish his goal. And so as we think about our goals in life, we should consider how we might accomplish bigger goals and do more with this life God has given us. If we figure out what things would help us accomplish these goals, but they're things that we haven't been doing because we don't want to do them. Then we have to choose to do those things even though we don't want to. We are focusing on achieving the ultimate goal rather than on avoiding the present discomfort of doing the things that we don't like to do. And then with God's direction and help, we can serve him better with our lives. All right, that is that is 2 Samuel 19. So let's have a word of prayer and then we'll sign off. Let's pray. Father, thank you for these stories in the Bible and the things that the things that you want to teach us through the stories. Help us to open our hearts and minds to what you have to tell us through your Bible, through other teachers, through other people, and help us to figure out the things that we need to do to accomplish the goals that you have for us, that we have for ourselves. But they're things that we've been avoiding because we don't really like to do them. So we need to learn what those things are and then make ourselves do them so we can be more productive for our lives and for your kingdom. And so that we can have a better, more intimate relationship with you through our spiritual lives. Thanks for all the folks that tune in here. Pray your blessing on them and on and on their lives and the things that they need to do. And we pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. Well, thanks again for tuning in. And as far as I know, I will be back here as usual next week. So hope to see you then. And have a great week. And bye-bye.